Look around you. Observe the people in your life, your workplace, your social circles. You have been sold a dangerous, pacifying lie since the day you were born. Society tells you that respect is a reward for goodness. That if you are polite, hardworking, transparent, and accommodating, people will naturally recognize your value and treat you with dignity. The uncomfortable reality is entirely different. Think about the most accommodating person you know. The one who is always available, always willing to compromise, always explaining their actions, and always putting others first. Are they the most respected person in the room, or are they the most exploited? History repeatedly shows that human beings do not respect weakness wrapped in kindness. They prey on it. Respect is not a moral currency. It is a psychological extortion. It is a transaction based purely on power, leverage, and the subconscious signals you broadcast to the world. Before you even open your mouth to speak, a silent primal evaluation has already taken place. People are essentially biological algorithms, deeply wired by evolution, constantly scanning their environment for threats and opportunities. They read the microexpressions on your face. They measure the exact duration of your eye contact. They observe the way you physically take up space in a room, or how you subconsciously shrink to avoid inconveniencing others. Within milliseconds, they are asking themselves one subconscious question: can I step on this person? If you are overly eager to please, if your smile is too quick and unearned, if your body language screams that you desperately need their validation, you have already lost the game. You have broadcasted the prey signal. You have voluntarily placed yourself at the absolute bottom of the invisible hierarchy that governs every single human interaction. To reverse this, you must master the dark psychology of value. You must understand that human beings are fundamentally wired to covet what they cannot easily control and to discard what is handed to them for free. You cannot ask someone to respect you. You cannot sit down and logically explain to them why you deserve their admiration. The moment you verbally demand respect, you prove to them that you do not possess it. Instead, respect must be engineered. It must be forced. Not through physical dominance, loud aggression, or tyrannical behavior. Those are the fragile tools of the deeply insecure. True, undeniable respect is extracted through the quiet, terrifying power of self-containment. It is about becoming a psychological puzzle that others cannot easily solve, an entity they quickly realize they cannot manipulate. To force someone to respect you, you must make the act of disrespecting you psychologically dangerous. You must teach them, without necessarily using a single word, that your presence is a high-value privilege and your absence is a devastating consequence they cannot afford. This requires a complete rewiring of how you interact with the world. You must violently sever the desire to be liked and begin mastering the cold mechanics of power and perception. This transformation begins with the first and most profoundly misunderstood weapon in your psychological arsenal. The most potent weapon in your arsenal is not what you say, but what you brutally withhold. It is the calculated, terrifying use of silence and restraint. Observe the behavior of the insecure. When faced with a misunderstanding, a subtle challenge, or even just an awkward pause, their immediate instinct is to over-explain. They drown the room in words. They justify their actions, their choices, and their very existence, desperately trying to manipulate how they are perceived. Why? Because they operate from a position of profound psychological debt. They subconsciously believe their baseline existence is not enough, so they must constantly verbalize to prove their worth. The uncomfortable reality is this: when you over-explain yourself, you are instinctively elevating the other person to the role of a judge. You are handing them the gavel and silently begging for a favorable verdict. You are asking for permission to be exactly who you are. And nothing kills respect faster than asking for it. Now, compare that to the master of restraint. The master understands that silence is a vacuum, and human nature absolutely abhors a vacuum. When you remain quiet, maintaining a calm, unbothered gaze, it triggers a deep-seated primitive anxiety in the person opposite you. People are terrified of silence because it forces them to confront their own thoughts and insecurities. If you have the discipline to hold that silence, the other person will almost always rush to fill it. And in their nervous haste to keep the interaction alive, they will reveal everything. They will expose their insecurities, their true motives, and their hidden agendas. While they talk to inflate their ego or ease their anxiety, you simply listen. You become the apex observer, the collector of data, while they willingly strip themselves psychologically bare. Furthermore, speaking less creates an aura of impenetrable mystery. Familiarity breeds contempt. It is a fundamental law of human nature. The more accessible your thoughts and emotions are, the cheaper they become. If people know exactly what you are thinking, what you fear, and how you will react, they have already conquered you in their minds. You become predictable, and the predictable are never respected. They are used. When you speak sparingly, your words accumulate massive gravity. When you do finally open your mouth, people lean in. They hang on your every syllable because they know your words are rare, deliberate, and expensive. You must violently eradicate the desire to be validated through endless dialogue. If someone deliberately misunderstands you, let them. If someone questions your choices with a veil of subtle disrespect, do not rush to frantically defend yourself. Defensiveness is the ultimate confession of vulnerability. It tells the predator that their attack landed successfully. Instead, offer them a chilling, measured silence. Look at them calmly, as if you are studying a peculiar and slightly amusing insect. This complete lack of verbal reaction is profoundly disorienting. It instantly flips the psychological dynamic. It forces them to suddenly replay their own words in their head, to second-guess their approach, and ultimately, to submit to the uncomfortable, heavy pressure of your restraint. By mastering silence, you stop leaking power. You become a psychological fortress, impossible to read and dangerous to provoke. But silence and restraint are merely the foundation. Eventually, human nature dictates that someone will actively try to breach the walls of that fortress. You have built the fortress of silence, but do not be naive. Human nature dictates that someone, eventually, will probe the perimeter. They will test your boundaries. Most people fundamentally misunderstand what a boundary actually is. They believe a boundary is a conversation. They think it is a stern warning, an emotional argument, or an angry declaration of, "You cannot treat me this way." The uncomfortable reality is that words are exceedingly cheap. Declaring a boundary without enforcing a ruthless consequence is not a boundary at all. It is merely a suggestion. It is a negotiation with a predator. When you complain to someone about how they are treating you, you are still operating from a position of weakness. You are still asking them to change their behavior to make you comfortable. You are demanding respect rather than commanding it. Disrespect is rarely born overnight. People do not usually start by blatantly insulting you to your face. Instead, they test the waters. They execute small, calculated infractions to see exactly what you will tolerate. It begins with microaggressions, a subtle, backhanded joke at your expense in front of a group. Arriving 30 minutes late without a genuine apology, a dismissive eye roll, a deliberately ignored text message. These are not accidents. They are unconscious reconnaissance missions. The other person is gathering psychological data on your self-esteem. When you let these micro-disrespects slide, perhaps because you do not want to cause a scene, or because you convince yourself that it is not a big deal, you fail the test. You signal to their biological algorithm that your threshold for abuse is highly negotiable. You give them silent permission to push a little further the next time. Now, compare that to the behavior of someone who possesses undeniable value. How do they handle disrespect? They do not complain, they do not argue, they act. The ultimate test of a boundary is not what you say, it is what you are willing to do. The most powerful, terrifying response to disrespect is not an explosive, rage-filled argument. It is the swift, calm, and absolute withdrawal of your presence. If someone disrespects your time by making you wait, you do not sit there and whine about it, you leave. If someone speaks to you with unearned condescension, you do not try to logically dismantle their argument. You end the conversation, break eye contact, and walk away. You must internalize that your attention, your energy, and your physical presence are extreme privileges. They are not inherent rights granted to everyone you meet. When you calmly remove their access to you, you send a psychological shockwave through their system. You demonstrate, without a single shouted word, that you are perfectly willing to burn the bridge rather than let them cross it with muddy boots. History repeatedly shows that people only respect consequences. When you enforce a boundary through immediate action, you communicate absolute self-respect. You show them the most dangerous trait a human being can possess, the willingness to walk away. When they realize that you do not need them, that you are perfectly content to stand alone rather than stand in the presence of disrespect, their perception of your value skyrockets. But to execute this level of ruthless boundary enforcement, you must first master the hardest battle of all. You must conquer the internal enemy that threatens to expose your weaknesses the moment you are challenged. The uncomfortable reality is that your emotions are the greatest liability you possess. We are conditioned to believe that wearing our hearts on our sleeves is healthy, genuine, and a sign of authenticity. But in the ruthless realm of power dynamics and psychological warfare, displaying uncalculated emotion is nothing short of suicidal. When you react impulsively to an insult, a subtle slight, or a high-pressure situation, you are handing the remote control of your nervous system directly to your opponent. Think about the mechanics of anger and defensiveness. When someone provokes you and you immediately snap, what have you actually accomplished? You have confirmed to them that they hold ultimate power over your internal state. You have danced exactly to the tune they played. You have become a predictable, easily manipulated puppet. Predators, manipulators, and those seeking dominance will constantly throw out emotional bait. They will subtly insult your intelligence, question your choices, or create sudden, unwarranted chaos. They do this because an emotional target is a blind target. When you are flooded with anger, panic, or the desperate need to defend yourself, your logical brain shuts down. You make tactical mistakes. You over-communicate. You expose your deepest insecurities. They feed on your reaction because your loss of control is the absolute validation of their dominance. Now compare that to the devastating power of emotional mastery. Imagine a scenario where someone throws a meticulously crafted insult directly at you. Instead of your face flushing red, instead of raising your voice, and instead of launching into a frantic verbal defense, you do nothing. You simply hold their gaze. You let 3, 4, maybe 5 agonizing seconds of pure, unbroken silence pass. You do not scowl, you do not smile. Your face remains an absolute blank slate. You look at them with the mild, detached curiosity of a scientist observing a highly predictable rat in a maze. This singular action, the calculated, emotionless pause, is utterly terrifying to the human ego. It completely shatters their internal script. They threw a psychological punch, expecting an impact, but it landed in an absolute void. History repeatedly shows that unpredictability is the ultimate shield against manipulation. When you consistently refuse to react emotionally, you become a psychological anomaly. People cannot categorize you. Because they cannot read your emotional state, they cannot predict your next move. This forces them into a subconscious state of hypervigilance. They must now tread incredibly carefully around you because they have no idea what it takes to trigger you, or worse, what your cold, calculated retaliation might look like. You must train yourself to violently detach from the immediate sting of provocation. View every insult, every chaotic event, and every aggressive maneuver as a mere psychological test of your internal frame. When you anchor yourself in cold, stoic logic, you starve your opponents of the chaotic reaction they desperately crave. You strip them of their power and absorb it yourself. You become impossible to manipulate because there are no emotional strings left for them to pull. You are no longer reacting to the world. You are forcing the world to react to your unshakable calm. However, remaining unbothered and maintaining an impenetrable frame is only one half of the equation. To achieve absolute, unquestioned respect, you must construct a reality where your presence is undeniably rare and your value is permanently etched into the minds of everyone you meet. The uncomfortable reality is that human beings are fundamentally incapable of valuing what is always abundantly available. It is a harsh, unyielding economic principle that applies directly to human psychology. Abundance destroys value while scarcity creates it. Think about the air you breathe. It keeps you alive, yet you never give it a single conscious thought because it is everywhere, demanding absolutely no effort to acquire. Now compare that to a rare diamond. It serves almost no practical, life-sustaining purpose, yet wars are fought over it and fortunes are spent to acquire it, simply because it is incredibly difficult to obtain. When you are constantly accessible, always answering messages within seconds, and perpetually shifting your own schedule to accommodate the whims of others, you are signaling a profound psychological deficit. You are telling the world that your time, and by extension your worth, is cheap. You become the heir. People will use you. They will comfortably consume your energy to survive their own days, but they will never truly admire or respect you. To force respect, you must master the psychology of scarcity. You must limit your availability. This is not about playing petty, passive-aggressive games or pretending to be busy. It is about genuinely prioritizing your own purpose, your own vision, and your own peace above the endless, trivial demands of the crowd. When you do not immediately reply, when you decline invitations without offering a desperate, rambling apology, you create a psychological gap. You introduce friction. History repeatedly shows that people unconsciously project high value onto that which they must wait for and that which they must work to attain. When your presence becomes a rare, gated commodity, every interaction with you is suddenly elevated in importance. People will begin to prepare for you. They will weigh their words more carefully. They will instinctively treat you with a higher degree of reverence because their primal biological algorithm recognizes that you are a scarce, high-status resource. Over time, this engineered scarcity, combined with your calculated silence, your ruthless boundary enforcement, and your absolute emotional mastery, calcifies into something unbreakable: your reputation. A powerful reputation is the ultimate psychological force multiplier. It does the heavy lifting for you before you even enter the room. A reputation is not built on what you loudly claim to be. It is built on the predictable, cold consistency of your unyielding actions over time. When the people around you finally realize that you cannot be bought with cheap flattery, that you cannot be rattled by emotional manipulation, and that you are perfectly, coldly willing to walk away from any table where respect is not being served, a fundamental shift occurs in their minds. They stop testing you. They recognize that you operate on a completely different psychological plane. You are no longer playing their desperate game of validation and submission. You are the architect of your own reality. Master these principles, and you will understand that the dark psychology of value is not about being cruel, arrogant, or malevolent. It is about understanding the brutal mechanics of human nature and refusing to be a casualty of them. Stop asking for respect. Stop negotiating your worth with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Become silent, become scarce, and become completely unbothered by the chaos of lesser minds. The world does not respect those who politely beg for a seat at the table. It respects those who own the table and who are never, ever afraid to eat alone.